To outsiders, Italy is beautiful, liberating, and sexy. But despite its amorous reputation and sensual sense of style, Italians see things quite differently. For the younger generation, the world is a hostile and chaotic place within which they are striving to create a secure island of pleasure. Today, that world is closing in around them. A land of sun, intense beauty, and pleasure. Italy's history is a rich tapestry of the divine and sensual, woven by nearly 3 millennia of myths, masterpieces, and intrigues. Authors have long mused about its mysterious seductive force. To Stendhal, its charm is akin to that of being in love. Luigi Barzini surmised that love and Italy's charm were complementary, and that one intensifies the other. Love in Italy is notoriously more satisfactory. Italy seen through lovers' eyes is more enchanting. For centuries, Italy's reputation for beauty and love has attracted men and women from all over the world, who seek to lose themselves in the Mediterranean sun, wine, and easy living. And perhaps find themselves struck by a thunderbolt of love, a colpo di fulmine. Here in Rome, this beauty and romance are openly displayed.
Rome, it is a romantic city. I mean, I think when I go through Rome sometimes I feel the city breathing.
La trovo romantica, mi piace passeggiare e poi anche mi piace girare qui intorno e nelle piccole strade, nelle piccole piazze, lo trovo un posto romantico, sì.
Italians like to project the idea of a romantic Italy abroad. I don't think that Italians live the romantic stereotype in the same way that they project it to other countries. Life is much more complicated than simple romance and sensuality and beauty.
È una città romantica, la città eterna.
No, ma probabilmente dipende pure dalla realtà. Certo, un iracheno che vive qua sarà contentissimo, uno di San Francisco un po' meno. Come, cioè, è sempre tutto relativo.
Nothing in Italy is ever what it seems to be. Despite all the amorous talk, Italy's divorce rate is on the rise, while that of marriage has plummeted. And despite being known for their love of family, Italians are rarely having children. Year after year, many come here to touch the heart of Italy, only to uncover a grand illusion.
They're a lot more forward. Yeah, they are. And they approach you a lot more often. They're straight to the point. Yeah, very direct. Like at the Spanish Steps last night, we got mobbed by 10 Italians. We were surrounded. They just surrounded us and we're like, what's your name? What's your name? Where are you from? Oh, okay. Do you like him? Do you like my friend? Like, he's really cute. We're like, we don't even know you.
If I want a relationship with a girl, it's very difficult because the Italians are very, very closed, and but the guys are very open. Come on, but they only want the one thing from a German girl or from every girl who's beyond.
Italian men like to do the Latin lover kind of act and so on, but they also know that it convinces foreigners much more than it convinces other Italians.
Of course, real life is different from what foreigners see as they sweep through for a glass of wine in a sun-drenched piazza, and a glimpse of the radiant, beatific faces that inspired centuries of artists. This fantasy life hides a much darker reality. A modern society in the midst of sweeping transition, uncertainty, and mistrust, in which the ancient traditions are being called into question.
It's a beautiful country. It's a country that people come to enjoy themselves. I mean, the art, the architecture, the weather, the food. I mean, it's all about sensuality one way or another.
Anybody who represents Italian culture is attractive. I mean, there's an irresistible pull of Italian culture, Italian male beauty, what can I say? I used to go to the swimming pool with my friend Letitia, who's an archaeologist, and we would, lie there after we did our laps. We would lie there and we'd look at Franco, and we would have all these technical arguments about whether his musculature was more severe style or more classical or more Hellenistic. So the beauty aspect was not lost.
Italy is becoming a lot more similar to other European countries than to its own past. I mean, the past 30, 40 years have changed Italian society so radically.
Ti voglio bene!
In the 60s, there'd been the economic boom, people had money, but there was still more or less the old family structure. And when I first came to Italy, a divorce was unheard of. It wasn't allowed. There was no abortion, but there was no contraception. Adultery, a woman could be put in prison for adultery, a man only if he committed adultery in his own home, in the family home.
Non sono più tua madre, tu non sei più mio figlio, non sei più il marchese dei Vitti, tu sei l'uomo dal braccio d'oro.
The mother tended to rule the home, but it was the men who would go out and do their dealings and strut around, and the women had to produce the food, produce the children. I mean, a girl baby was almost the next thing to an unwanted baby.
But in the late 20th century, the country experienced a new and unrivaled prosperity. And with the birth of a burgeoning middle class, a largely rural society abandoned its fields for the cities, and unsettling changes occurred. Time-honored traditions began to erode, even those that had once been so fundamental to Italian society, like marriage and children. Amid these transformations, the roles of men and women in society were called into question. Traditionally, Italians found a spouse through family connections or from their close circle of friends.
Most of our friends, they met when they were in high school, or they lived in the same house, and they just saw each other, and then one day they started, and then they went on, and they got married.
Today, this is no longer the case.
You can find a person which you will fall in love also in a disco, for example. You can meet him into a discotheque, but after a few times that you go out with him, you can know him better, and so you can fall in love with him.
Abbiamo vinto un concorso in un'amministrazione e abbiamo cominciato a lavorare nello stesso giorno, così ci siamo conosciuti un po'.
Per me, io avevo completamente frainteso, pensavo lei fosse una ragazza che veniva dal paese, che aveva vinto il concorso e venisse da un paese, e la vedevo al supermercato che sceglieva le cose più economiche, e allora dicevo, questa ragazza mi interessa.
The family was a financial and spiritual unit, but not necessarily a romantic one, as it remains today in more traditional areas.
I know that in the South it is very common for parents to think especially about female children as people who will get married as soon as possible with a man possibly from the same town or from the same area, and that they will stay in the same place and they will have children. And the main thing in a woman's, for most of them, for most of parents, is to get married as soon as possible and to get married with, to do a buon matrimonio, as they say, so good marriage, to find a rich, wealthy person to marry and have a better life.
As D.H. Lawrence wrote, husband and wife are brought together in a child, which they both worship. But in each of them there is only the great reverence for the infant and the reverence for fatherhood or motherhood, as the case may be. There is no spiritual love.
They get married just about when they're ready to have babies. And then they immediately have babies and they become just like their parents.
While family was the center of civic life, a heritage of guilt and suspicion rendered it an explosive union. As Lawrence rightly noticed of Italian men, a very public passion for women here betrayed their animosity.
Ma lei è un maleducato! Ma maleducato è lei! È anche un brutto!
You men don't realize the way you change, the way you speak, and the way you behave when you have a colleague or when you have someone, when you have a woman.
The same for the woman.
It is
Everybody outside his family has a different behavior.
It is the same as a woman.
Italian men aren't romantic, they're just forward. Yeah, they're not especially romantic.
They're like, here, have a glass of wine. Okay, let's go back to my place.
Ciao, Bella, can I take you home?
Yeah, they're way too free with the word Bella. So Bella and sexy. Yeah.
Franco!
Usually Italians, when are outside and see a woman, okay, they look at her. It's normal. Maybe if you go, I don't know, in Sweden, I don't know where, probably this happens less.
They don't even see you, I assure you. In England, they don't even see you. I'm sorry. Well, because, no, it wasn't, not because it was me, but they didn't even look at the best.
I'm talking about
the best of the best.
I had a life where I changed a lot, my partner. And then I didn't have this problem to change when I have a partner. If I don't like my partner, I left my partner. And then I changed partner. But my friends that have a family, children, that's much more difficult. That's the problem. Then there are a lot of extra marriage affairs. Not all my friends, but some, they have these problems.
One hears about an incredible number of infidelities, particularly by men. I mean, it still seems to be mainly the husbands who are being unfaithful, but also women increasingly.
Prego, 2 piselli, sono buoni.
Nein, questo meglio di tuo pisello.
Sì.
Tuo pisello non buono.
No, domanda al zio, dai.
So my young friends, they like to talk a lot about females. That's also if they don't do anything, they like to talk, to show that they are interested in female, that I think they are available.
Le madri ci dovessimo lavorare.
Le madri!
Oh, I think there are a lot of marriage infidelities, but also in England there are a lot. I would say, I don't know, I would say more, because I heard in England of people who split up 3-4 times with their partners and they got married with another man or another woman because they had an affair. Probably in Italy people have affairs, but they don't split up.
%15% of marriages end in divorce in this country, which is, again, very, very low. If you compare it to other countries in the EU, I mean, there are some countries where 76% of marriages end in divorce. So Italians are getting married less, but then when they get married, they seem to intend to keep it going forever.
Infidelity, particularly that of men, continues to be a common and quite accepted feature of relationships. But while the myth of the Italian playboy continues to loom large, the unspoken truth is that men are not by any means the only ones who cheat.
You think that we go out getting women around in their home cooking? It's not true, the stereotypes.
Che accade, Madonna? Accade la cosa più triste del mondo. È tornato mio marito.
Chissà che...
Cornuto, cuckold, is the worst insult you can hurl in Italian. It cuts into the deepest fears of an Italian man. This fear is pervasive.
Cornuto means your wife is being unfaithful to you. You're a cuckold. So it is used for a man. I suppose you could feminize it, but really it's a stigma associated with a man. If he somehow isn't manly enough to satisfy his wife, then his wife is going to go elsewhere. My parents' generation, men were very, very possessive of their wives. They often made it very difficult for their wives to work because they didn't like the kind of financial independence, but also the physical independence that leaving the house would give women.
In a sign of the growing visibility of women's infidelity, the country's highest appeals court recently ruled that a woman was justified in lying to conceal an extramarital affair to protect her honor. The tradition of suspicion continues. In a recent survey of Italian women, 46% admitted to peeking through their husband's text messages to see if he was cheating. While such jealousy and suspicion are known to inspire passion, research has shown that, despite the reputation of these fashionable Latin lovers and their very public displays of affection, Italians are not spending as much time between the sheets as we might think. In a recent study, nearly 60% of Italian men admitted that they were worried about their sexual performance. More than 30% of women reported that they were not having sex, and another 30% judged their sex lives to be inadequate. In fact, the only Italians that seem to be enjoying themselves are the elderly. Nearly 40% of septuagenarians are reported to enjoy active sex lives. In a society caught between time-honored tradition and materialistic prosperity, these figures foreshadow larger issues within Italian society. The once sacred but stormy bonds of love seem to be disintegrating. Could this spell the end of the Italians? Riding on the heels of an incredible history, and on the prosperity of their parents' and grandparents' generations, Italy's youth is a lost generation. With shrinking prospects and increasing pressures, no one seems to understand the language of love.
Relationships in this country are difficult for a whole lot of reasons, particularly economic reasons. A lot of relationships are very limited by the fact that so many young people have to live at home with their parents until they're in their 30s, not because they want to necessarily, but because they can't afford to do otherwise. It's a country where there are so many pressures, particularly on women, that really, surviving a relation and keeping your relationship intact against a lot of complications is how it defines most people's relationships.
Adesso in Italia la situazione è una situazione nella quale per poter comprare una casa bella, normale, devi chiedere un prestito che pagherai per tutta la vita. Prima non era così.
We don't have money. I mean, if I get 1,000 euro per month, I can have a family.
generale sì, molte persone possono avere delle difficoltà perché comunque in una città grande se non riesci a trovare un lavoro sicuramente non hai abbastanza soldi, sicuramente può essere difficile. Effettivamente ci possono essere delle difficoltà.
You can't program things in life. You have to go like month by month, and that's how we live. How can you think about having a family? I think you like that.
The idea that a child at the age of sort of 20, 18, 22 should really become an autonomous person and move out and have their own life with their own little pad and their own jobs and their own friends, that was just not a concept.
Poi uno si abitua ad avere tante comodità e che non vuoi rinunciare a nulla, ecco. Comunque quando ci si sposa si rinuncia a tantissime cose e si rinuncia un po' al tempo proprio libero così e si rinuncia pure anche a delle spese più futili, insomma tutte queste cose e molto spesso è usato come alibi.
It's because of the man the problem. Definitely, they're never ready to have a steady relationship.
My language partner is turning 25 and he lives at home with his parents and I think that's kind of weird. I do. I think it's kind of weird. He needs to move out.
25, 26, 28, too much time. They will be ready at 40. It's too late, I think.
But perhaps the reason is that Italians just take marriage far more seriously.
For us, marriage is still, even though, you know, we split up, we get divorced, but the idea of marriage is still very strong. It's a serious matter. We don't marry like for the sake of it, thinking like, okay, things don't work, I get divorced. We don't have this way of thinking yet.
Could it really be all the fault of the men? Italian women today seem trapped between tradition and modernity.
An Italian woman hardly would say like, tonight if I find somebody I fancy, I would go to bed with him. She would say, this guy is really particular to me. I mean, that's a really simple example.
There's women just walking down the street in fur coats and saying, where are you going? So, well, I'm just going to the butcher's. That they really, really dress up for doing, you know, banal things.
I'm much more accommodating to his needs, I think, than most American women I know are of their husbands. And I resisted as an American child of the 60s. You know, men don't get this, they don't get that, they certainly don't get lunch. And, you know, I lost the battle.
Women in Italy are not working in large number. It is an economic problem. They have to find a good husband. In any case, they are not working because they are not pushed to work.
While they lag behind their European counterparts, Italian women are finally entering the workforce. An increasing number of women here no longer want to be just mothers and wives. The percentage of women in the workforce has risen from only 22% to 47% in just 10 years. But whether dictated by a newfound independence or plain economic necessity, the changing roles of women in society are still reflected by traditional expectations at home.
Un'altra fregatura cosiddetta per le donne della mia generazione era che ci hanno fatto crescere con l'idea che dovevamo lavorare, quindi dovevamo studiare, ci dovevamo laureare e dovevamo cominciare subito poi a lavorare, tutto messo così. E l'idea di avere figli è stata come rimandata per noi. Alla fine tantissime della mia generazione si sono ritrovate a cercare di avere figli troppo tardi.
In a recent study by the University of Florence, mothers from across Italy reported that despite their growing career aspirations, their husbands are often unwilling to pick up the slack around the house. Frightened of the additional responsibility and pressures, many women are choosing to postpone marriage and family until their late 30s or later. Sometimes they find it is too late.
Since the 70s, the birth rate started to fall. And it really hit rock bottom in the 1990s. Italy had the second lowest birth rate in the world. Now it's crept up a little bit, but it's a long-term problem. Italy spends a tiny amount of GDP on childcare and child-related services. It spends about half the EU average. The Italian government is not providing the Italian people with the kind of childcare services that they need. Salaries are amongst the lowest in the OECD area, which means the average salary for an Italian is $19,000 a year compared to about $31,000 in the US. It means both parents have to work in order to support a family. But there aren't childcare services. There just aren't enough kindergartens and so on for mums to be able to leave their children while they're at work. So the pressure is on women to decide whether they have a career or whether they have children. And often they just have no choice. Financially, they have to work. Italians would love to have 2 kids per couple, but they don't. They keep it down to 1. They talk about the missing child, il bambino negato.
At 1.3 children per woman, Italy's fertility rate is one of the lowest in the Western world, and more than 1 in 5 of the population is now over 65 years old. By some estimates, the population will drop 30% in the next 50 years. And by the next century, only 10 million Italians will be left in Italy. Many fear that Italians will soon be outnumbered in their own country by immigrant groups, whose birth rates remain high despite lower incomes and lack of social benefits.
The poor people from the third world has a lot of children. They are in very bad economic condition, much worse than our Italians, young Italians. Then it's not for economic reason, but it's because they want to have a very good level of life. They don't want to spend money. They are, I think, a little egoist. They prefer to have a good car than have children.
It's generally believed that for every 2 legal immigrants, there is 1 illegal. So let's assume that all in all, there are about 6 million immigrants in Italy, which comes to about 10% of the population.
I think that we're going to see big demographic changes because, in fact, the immigrants are having more children than the Italians are. And I don't know, who can say? If that starts to bother people, there may be a sort of an ethnic surge, self-defense to have more native babies, more Italian babies. But I don't think it's going to be conscious.
Immigrants are very different from Italians, though, in terms of reproduction and so on. Because for a start, they're younger than Italians. The Italian population is aging very fast, but immigrants come to Italy when they're young, strong, want to work. And so, many of them are in their 20s and 30s. They also are much more willing to have kids than Italians. So the average immigrant woman is having 2.5 kids compared to the average Italian woman who's having 1.3. It's very easy for a certain type of politician and a certain type of journalist in this country to transform it into a panic.
In politics, this fear is spun into xenophobic rants against immigration, but few in power are willing to directly address the growing public suspicion that despite their near zealous respect for mothers and children, Italians are simply dying out. Traditions of artisanal quality are being replaced with a culture of materialism and designer labels. And a new generation with few prospects for the future finds itself questioning its faith.
Well, up until the unification of Italy, the church provided everything that Italians needed, welfare, food if you were poor, medicine, education, and so on. The church was the one organization that was always there, and it was in every single little village.
When I first came here, the church was, one would say, almost all-powerful. its power was rooted to a great extent in the Concordat, which Mussolini very cynically drew up with the church, which gave the church immense powers over people's private lives.
The church ensured relative stability and protection, but the Catholic Church no longer holds the sway it once did, with many Italians openly resisting what they see as the Vatican's intrusion into their private lives.
I am Catholic, but I don't follow in a critical way what the church says. Probably I am not a good Catholic, because if you are a good Catholic, you should follow what the Pope says and what the church says without asking yourself very many questions. But if you live in modern life, you can't think that you won't have pre-marriage intercourses and will never use in your life contraception, and that you will never live with your boyfriend before the marriage. And I think that a lot of young people who say they are Catholic, they are also very much hypocrites.
Stavo passandola nel forum e vediamo un calendario orrendo, ma veramente orrendo.
Ma il calendario c'è una foto del Papa in primo piano che è veramente una delle persone più brutte del mondo. E allora io ho fatto, quanto è brutto, prendo sto calendario per regalarlo a questa mia amica, andiamo alla cassa e gli dico, ma ti rendi conto quanto è brutto questo? Gli dico alla cassiera. E la cassiera dice, è il Papa, non è né brutto né bello, è il Papa. Ho fatto sì, ma oggettivamente è il Papa, non si può dire che è brutto.
The church is always try to regulate everything. She's tried to regulate the way you have sex, when you have sex, why, if you don't have protection. And the church was trying to forbid us to have the divorce back in 1970. When we went to have this referendum, the church, she could say, you're going to die if you vote pro. But everybody went there and we say, we want the divorce.
In fact, I remember demonstrations in Piazza San Pietro for divorce, and I remember how many couples there were without wedding rings on. And that was very, very common in Italy. I mean, okay, there wasn't divorce, but people did form new families, and they were, as it were, illegal families, or at least not legal ones. And children were brought up like that, and they were theoretically illegitimate.
Noi viviamo a stretto contatto con lo Stato, che è lo Stato dove risiede la massima espressione della religione cattolica. Quindi siamo molto vicini alla città del Vaticano. E questo influsso, vuoi o non vuoi, è un influsso costante e anche benefico dal mio punto di vista.
When there's a service, the church bells ring, and you can hear them ringing, and the people around the church go to church, which a very sort of romantic sort of ideal that you would think like 400 or 500 years ago in England. You know, the church bells ring and you go to church. It does happen, of course, in England still, but it's nothing to such a great extent, and it's very much part of Italian life, I feel.
You know, all the indicators suggest that Italians, on the whole, don't pay much attention to what the church tells them. I mean, less than 30% of Italians go to church regularly. Even fewer are actually abiding by the church's teaching on sexuality and marriage and divorce and so on.
Noi conosciamo poi tantissime persone poi alla fin fine che magari non è che sono tutti che ormai in chiesa non ci vanno, tantissime persone che conosciamo non vanno in chiesa, ognuno fa la sua vita, sono quelli non sposati anche che ne abbiamo conosciuti.
Però forse
ci sono, nel nostro caso magari...
La maggior parte delle persone che conosciamo sono coppie sposate.
Cioè la religione comunque, cioè la chiesa comunque continua ad avere un certo potere in certi ambienti.
Io del Papa questo che posso dire, che è deludente, è un Papa che è deludente perché non riprende nella cultura cristiana dell'accoglienza, non concilia, divide, crea dissapori in famiglia, crea disarmonia, è il caos.
In Italy there are a lot of people that are not so religious, then the influence is not so strong anymore. I think after Second World II, the influence was much bigger. Now it's much less, but there is also. Also, if you have an influence on the 20% of the population, it's a big influence. You can change, for example, an election.
Io mi ricordo quando ero piccolo, no? La chiesa era, quando andavo al paesino di mia madre giù, mi raccontavano che i briganti, quando entravano dentro una chiesa, non potevano più essere catturati, no? Perché la chiesa accoglieva tutti. E questa cosa secondo me non c'è più.
The Catholic values are the strength of the family, the loyalty towards your spouse, modest, conservative behavior. And Italians on the surface often still abide by that. But then, you know, Italians are using contraception, they are having abortions, they are having extramarital sex and all the other things that the church doesn't approve of. But it's behind the scenes.
The Church has not stayed static in its view of morality. In 2008, the Vatican created a new list of sins, including pollution and genetic manipulation.
La Chiesa, lo sappiamo tutti, storicamente si è evoluta tantissimo. Siamo passati dall'Inquisizione fino ad un Papa come Wojtyla che attraverso la sua diplomazia è riuscito a contribuire ad una rinascita democratica in alcune zone del mondo.
Bishops still rail against the evils of homosexuality, casual sex, birth control, and cohabitation, but here it seems they are fighting a losing battle. And while Italy is one of the few European countries that does not legally recognize the rights of non-married couples, a growing number here regard marriage as an antiquated institution associated with arrangements of necessity and family control.
For my mentality, I was against marriage. And I always say that I'll never marry. It doesn't mean that I didn't have a good relationship or maybe, but the idea to marry was not in my mind.
The marriage rate in Italy is 4 per 1,000 inhabitants. This is half what it was in 1961. So Italians are getting married half as frequently as they were. It's also lower than the EU average. Italy is one of the countries where people get married least. The majority of people in their 20s and 30s consider themselves single. So Italians aren't getting married in the usual time frame that we think of. The average age for marriage is 30 for a woman and 32 for a man.
I have a lot of doubts in my life to marry somebody.
About the institution, not
about the institution, yeah. I was a little skeptical about the institution. I make a peace agreement with the institution, but for a formal reason, because there is not any recognition of two people living together. You have to marry to have this formal, legal recognition.
Since Franco had not been married, he had no children, he has a living mother and living siblings, he could make a will and leave what he wanted to me, which he did, but that was always subject to, that was always risky. What you can't do in Italy is you can't disinherit somebody. Your children have a right to your estate, your living parents have a right to your estate, and then various relatives. You don't have the same discretion that you do in the United States.
A renewed wave of cynicism has crept over the land of love, leaving many young people isolated and unable to find any meaningful connection. In a time of economic instability and forgotten traditions, it seems that nothing is sacred in Italy any longer, at least to Italians. But foreigners continue to come looking to find love. Italy's reputation as a paradise of exiles was forged during the Renaissance, when Italy's foremost minds dominated the arts and sciences, enticing the world to their doorsteps. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Grand Tour brought wealthy travelers from the north seeking culture, history, and especially adventure among the natives. As E.M. Forster wrote, I do believe that Italy really purifies and ennobles all who visit her. She is the school as well as the playground of the world. Today, tourists, young and old, flock here to stroll through Italy's sun-baked streets, admiring the easy life and warm, beautiful, inviting people, for whom making eye contact, and even more in public, is as natural as an evening passeggiata. In the warm air, with flirtatious eyes and suggestive glances, visitors are able to project their passions and indulge their senses in a way that's just not possible anywhere else.
Many foreigners have this idea that Italy is a country where anything goes, that you can express yourself freely, that Italians are passionate, they express all their feelings instinctively and so on. Italy's not like that at all. It's a very, very regulated society where there are very strict codes about how you behave in given contexts.
Many foreigners are drawn here by the relative freedom that comes with a carefree society and a moral relativism that tolerates sexual liaisons and prostitution, along with lax immigration laws. But this laissez-faire attitude towards illicit sex and lawlessness is also sowing the seeds of a very dark problem that is only beginning to receive adequate attention in the corridors of power. Throughout Italy, homegrown organized crime syndicates are forcing thousands of foreign women here into prostitution against their will. Prostitution has been visible and accepted since ancient times, and commercial sex continues to be legal, although frowned upon.
You see prostitutes here on Via Salaria, which is just here around the corner, also at midday or at 4 p.m. And you see cars that stop there. I have always been wondering who are these men that go with prostitutes, because I have never heard anyone saying, oh, by the way, I went with a prostitute. So you also can think that like normal people, like my doctor or my lawyer or people who would you never think about the fact that they can go with a prostitute, probably they do. Or family people, or people who have got a family, who have got 2 or 4 children and a normal life with his wife.
Some streets have been closed. You can't go by car at night because there were too many prostitutes and people was complaining. But if they just moved, they changed the place. You know, it's a kind of part of the reality. We don't care. Maybe I care if I know my son goes with the prostitute. I would get upset because of the ADS and the stuff.
I remember the first time I saw some, I think in Rome, there were some women gathered around, it was winter I think, there were some women gathered around a small bonfire on the road. And I said, what are they doing? Are they on strike or something? Because, you know, you see people in strike in England, they have a little brazier and we shall overcome. But no, they're prostitutes. Well, how do you know? I mean, you know, where's being innocent and whatnot, you know.
Io solo una volta sono stata con una prostituta ed era donna, cioè, ed era un'esperienza che volevo fare, l'ho fatta coscientemente. Quindi non è che vivono di sesso, prostituzione.
Cioè la prostituzione va bene, nel senso che alla fine...
Ma sti cazzi, cioè uno fa quello che gli pare.
Esatto.
Gli escort, le cose, come appunto dico, it's not my cup of tea.
Up until 1958, we had legal brothels in Italy. These were closed down. And all the prostitutes, I mean, apart from the very highest level escorts and so on, and most of the prostitutes just had to go onto the streets, and that's where most of it is happening. It's a big problem because there is so much exploitation happening. Italy is one of the countries that suffers most from human trafficking. Many of these women are brought into slavery, effectively. Of course, Italy has, you know, some of the most famous organized crime groups in the world. So everything, you know, it fits into a bigger picture.
From Eastern Europe, Africa, and Latin America, Italy's nearly 80,000 prostitutes are visible on beach drives and country roads. even at historical sites, often in broad daylight. After dark, the main streets are swarming with sex workers, a majority of which are illegal immigrants. New legislation is demonstrating that the Italian government is toughening its stance on human trafficking, but like many mafia-controlled enterprises, enforcement is a serious challenge, especially since demand here is high. The Interior Ministry and police estimate that 45% of Italian men visit prostitutes at least once a year. And as anyone driving past can tell, a great many of the streetwalkers are transvestites.
Questa mi piace molto.
Ti piace? Sfido io, no?
Many years ago, you took me to see the prostitute, they were transvestite, you remember, up in the north. When we weren't even married, you say, do you want to see real, very nice prostitute? But they are men, transvestite. They were perfect. And at that time, before the 1978 or something, it wasn't, you know, the plastic surgery wasn't something common. So seeing that, they were the most beautiful woman I ever seen, but they were not women, in fact.
Despite the fact that Italian men can be surprisingly affectionate in public, and can often be seen walking arm in arm or giving kisses to their friends, homosexuality remains a serious and unspoken taboo.
We have a lot of American friends, gay couples, and we double date with these gay couples. We don't have any Italian gay couple friends. We don't know any Italian gay couples. I don't think we do.
Yeah, that's true.
We know only gringo gay couples.
Yeah,
we know
we don't know
one
any.
here, but
We don't know any couple.
no, we don't.
Any
I don't even
Italian
know that I
couple.
know any Italian homosexuals.
No.
Well, I do some musicians, but otherwise.
Yeah, I know one couple.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, but no, I'm not a friend of this couple. But I don't know if they are stable. Probably they are less stable than the United States.
Yeah, in the United States, a gay couple is a couple.
Sì, ne conosciamo, sono persone che frequentiamo, che stimiamo anche professionalmente. Devo dire, non abbiamo mai vissuto in modo con disagio questa cosa, proprio perché non se n'è mai parlato, cioè era naturale. Adesso si crea il disagio perché se ne parla troppo, allora ciascuno di loro deve prendere una posizione per questo governo, per l'altro governo, per i Pax, contro i Pax. Non è giusto, loro devono vivere tranquillamente e avere i diritti che hanno tutte le altre persone.
Homosexuality is accepted in this country as long as it's kept behind closed doors. It's not illegal in this country, and officially homosexuals aren't discriminated against.
Comunque alla fine è tranquilla, perché i romani di base, se tu non rompi le scatole non ti rompono le scatole.
No, ma sono scazzati, poi sta
esatto.
cosa qua, cioè i romani poi sono stati annichiliti dalla religione, cioè calcola che il vero romano era quello che ammazzava i cristiani al Colosseo.
When I started giving the lesson, it was strange to have. I remember my first American student, they say, oh, I live in a house, he's gay or something. And his idea at the moment, and that was 20 years ago, more or less. Now it's normal. That's my last student, he's gay. We're today having fun because someone told that his romance was going to have a problem. And I say, but he's here, your love. So I was just talking with his gay. 20 years ago, maybe I would have been here, he's gay, okay. Just leave it alone. I think we got used to the idea.
Italian culture is inherently one of tolerance, as long as you are quiet about what you are doing. Thus, the gay rights movement and parade here in Rome remain contentious.
Ma al Gay Pride ci andiamo perché è divertente, però in realtà ci andiamo a far presenza pure, ma io ci ho portato pure i miei nipoti, cioè voglio dire è carina, è una festa, cioè è folklore quello, cioè come tu dici a Capodanno vedi, che ne so, tuo padre col cappelletto in testa e il naso rosso, certo è Capodanno, però tutti i giorni tuo padre non c'ha il cappelletto in testa e il naso rosso, e che c'è ancora troppo folklore secondo me, che va bene, a me diverte. Che non sono pochi, cioè quindi non possono essere...
che non sono pochi e
non
sono
siamo
persone...
pochi.
And if we have the gay pride or we have whatever in Rome, we just something that annoys us because we have a problem. We can't go to the place where the gay pride is gonna go.
There have been increasingly gay pride parades in this country, but the most recent one, the Minister for Equal Opportunities in the current Berlusconi government refused to give any kind of support to the gay pride parade, saying that homosexuality had nothing to do with equal opportunities. So clearly there's no intention of increasing rights.
But this is because we are in Rome. I think because we are in Rome. Because if we go to the north or a small place in the south, I think it's still a problem.
Ironically, the influx of foreigners has given strength to Italy's burgeoning gay rights movement, and same-sex couples are gaining cultural and legal recognition, albeit slowly.
There are increasingly sort of gay areas in cities. I mean, Rome now has what's known as Gay Street. Catania, a city in Sicily, has a very visible and dynamic gay scene. So it's changing. I mean, homosexuality is becoming much more a social and public form of identity, not only a private one. So I think it's going to change with time.
The search for love in Italy is a search for the divine. Pilgrims pour into these ancient narrow streets, swept away by the beatific saints in ecstasy. They are in the midst of a crumbling society. But with such a long and complex history, it is no wonder that Italians find it so difficult to come to grips with the past and shape their future. Gore Vidal once remarked on Italians' astonishing ability to pull themselves together in the face of a disaster, an ability perfectly balanced by their absolute inability to deal with success. Change here is nothing new. Ruled by foreign kings, popes, emperors, and barbarians, Italians have been able to create and recreate themselves for millennia, and in the process have mythologized and romanticized their culture and themselves. This is perhaps their most enduring and beautiful mark on the world, and perhaps what lies behind their astonishing ability to retain a sense of passion in the face of difficulties.
Bimba, io t'ho sempre amata, come amar non so di più. Tu però sei tanto ingrata, forse non mi sai capir. Tu non